Welcome to the Gentleman's Jury. I'm your co-host Zach,
And I'm your host, Robbie.
and today we are going to be talking about improving and fixing the educational system.
Okay,
So, go
yeah,
ahead, Rob.
I was going to say, first big thing that comes to mind when trying to fix the education system college.
College. I completely agree with that. Now,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts about it? Are you thinking useless? Are you thinking it should be free to everybody?
I'm kind of more of kind of more of a mindset where a free college isn't really free. Um, Taxpayers will pay for that every day for the rest
Oh
of their
yeah,
lives versus like paying 10 years off. And I mean, don't get me wrong, 10 years is an extremely long time to pay for college again. But in comparison, for 10 years instead of 60 years, it's kind of a nice trade off.
and to be honest, I still think like 10 years. That's a gracious period of make. That's on like the low side of how long it takes.
Right,
Because
but it's still not your entire lifetime,
yeah,
hopefully.
yeah, yeah, yeah. By the time you retire, hopefully your debt's paid off, basically. And in this case, even if you were retired, you'd still be paying taxes on it.
Right, exactly, and it's something that like I feel every American deals with, especially when coming up with the is it even worth it? I mean, you look at
Yeah,
degrees like being a doctor or a lawyer, and those obviously seem like they're worth it, but not everyone's going to do that. Some people want to do like a liberal arts degree, like feminist gender studies.
yeah, yeah. And it's not like that they're not useful in a way, but it's just like cost efficient for it. You still spend 4 years, 2 or more years going to this college for that degree, and the payout is almost similar to just taking flipping burgers, at a place. Now, obviously, you can have a pay increase depending, you might get lucky and have a big break, but for the most part, it's not really going to pay off in the long run. Now, it's something you should be able to enjoy, but I believe that maybe the access to it shouldn't cost as much in that sense, or possibly another way of doing it, because it's like getting an art degree. You can have an art degree. You can get a doctorate in art, possibly. Like you could do your 8 years and get this amazing art degree and look look great on paper. But even if your art is the most amazing thing, it's not the artist that makes the art become famous. It's the sellers. The sellers of the art are the ones that decide what the price is worth, and they get to choose. Hey, this one, you know, he stands out a little bit, and it may not be everyone's taste, but this is the one I'm going to judge and say that's worth $1 million.
Right, and degrees like arts degrees are expensive and like you said typically don't pay out.
Yeah,
Now degrees like being a lawyer pay out almost instantly in the
yeah,
sense of if you get picked up by a huge firm. Now that's not always guaranteed, but like in comparison to the time it would take you to get picked up by a firm versus the time you might become a famous artist, I'd definitely be picking lawyer over artist every time. And I'm not trying to
oh
say that people shouldn't go out and be an artist. In fact, art isn't, as I've learned after studying some ancient art history in college, it plays an important role in our culture, but
oh,
it's not
big time.
something you should waste money on just to hopefully have a chance.
Yeah, I feel like if it's like a way if you want to improve your art, then it's desirable. But I don't think it's something that you should invest 4 years of getting hundreds of $1,000s in debt for, just for the chance that it might pay off. It's like most of that time you could spend training yourself, looking online tutorials and stuff like that to better improve yourself. It's one of those things that come better with experience. The more you do it, the better you're going to be at it.
Right, and look,
Versus, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and looking at seeing liberal arts and art in general being kind of on the lower spectrum, where doctors and lawyers are kind of on the upper spectrum. What kind of sits in the middle that like might pay off but doesn't necessarily pay off? Like what in your mind kind of goes with that?
I would say it wouldn't say technically engineers, but like mechanical stuff, like learning how to be a plumber or like electrical stuff is kind of more in the middle. Like it pays off, but it takes time to pay off, you know. But you're also kind of more guaranteed that job. I'm trying to think of other ones. Teachers are another one. But it depends on kind of what teacher you're going to. Like if you go in as a professor in another college, it pays off. It pays off a lot quicker than I'm going to be an elementary school teacher, you know. But they're both as big of a necessity
Right,
in all honesty.
and what before I continue, electricians and plumbers are trade schools. So we'll circle
They
back
can
and
be, but you could be like electrical engineer. I'm saying electrician is a broad spectrum because of like electrical engineer or like a mechanical engineer.
oh,
You know,
okay. Oh, yeah.
obviously yes, there are trades, but to these they kind of represent that broad spectrum and kind of encompass them all into it. Because I believe as an electrical engineer, you're still doing a lot of what an electrician does, but electricians are kind of more hands on and the electrical engineer is the one who does the blueprints of like how it's going to be done.
Okay, so okay, yeah.
And
That
obviously, I
actually.
don't do those jobs, so it could be vary, and I may be way out there, and I might be in left field, not knowing what the fuck's going on. But that was my understanding because I did originally go to college to be a petroleum engineer, which is oil and stuff like that. And then I was kind of switching to electrical because I was like, okay, well, petroleum in this school will take me 4+ years just to get a associate's degree because of how much math it required and how they only allowed one math class per year. And I was like, okay, well, this, or not year, but per term. I was like, okay, I kind of want to change that up. So I was thinking, oh, electrical. And then I just kind of decided school wasn't for me. And I did go the trade school route,
Right,
or
and
at least currently in it.
I'm with you in that boat. I'm in college right now to become a teacher, actually,
Yeah.
a history teacher. But I'm also I work. I'm actually waiting for an interview into getting into a trade school. Um, so like
I mean,
that's why I was like we should probably circle back and cross that T before we continue forward. But I'm glad you laid it out the way you did because that made it much more. It kind of straightened that out.
yes, yes. And like kind of like the differences and the similarities between those, I think is kind of how that laid that one out.
Right.
So let's go into improving it. Like, what method do you think will be best to improve like that aspect of college?
So, I think we need to set colleges to a kind of a the way that we privatize them, and they and there's not so like I'm not big on government control
Yes.
because that's how things lead to like socialism and fascism and how World War II started and the Cold War and those countries and
Y'all
it
fell
gets
hard
into that.
school, kids. Continue. Continue, my bad.
But like I feel like government control kind of leads into that. But one of the things I think the government should do is step in and kind of set a federal mandate. They go
Like,
to like Oregon State University, right?
yes, yes.
They look at the tuition, and then they go to like Montana State University and they look at that tuition, and there's a stark difference. One of them is much higher than the other, right? And so what they need to do is just kind of level the playing field a little bit,
All right, let
make it
me
more
intervene. Let
affordable.
me let me intervene on that idea because I believe what you're saying is true. I do believe that there should be a cap. Like you know, I think there should be kind of like a cap of how much you can charge, but you got to also look at those schools of what they provide because there's like the Oregon State University is kind of more of a technical school. It is for like engineering classes and it's more directed towards that. And then you got Oregon University, which they're not the same. Oregon University is like the duck team and you got your beaver team. Uh, Oregon University is more towards arts and stuff like that. So even though they're both colleges, they kind of pander to different kind of sets of minds and skill sets when you go into them, and even that, and then the level of it'll go like because like at Oregon State University for petroleum, they'll go to like associates for it and perhaps bachelors. I didn't get into that. I was currently just looking at the associates, but they don't go much higher than that. You have to go to a specific school to get that higher degree in that area or that field. That you know.
Right,
And
and like doctors go through that too.
yeah, yeah, where like you have to go to a specific college for that like specific field of doctor too. Like if you're going to be a surgeon, you got to go to a specific surgeon school, for that particular kind of surgery too. It's and it's one of those things. It's like okay, so completely agree with you on that. Like there has to be a limit, but I think if you're like comparing schools to each other, as that limit setter, I think you're going to run into problems because they each have their own kind of presets of like, hey, this is what you can and cannot do unless you were to like unify all of them and to like you all provide the same no matter what. Like
And
that.
then you run into the problem of if everyone offers the same programs, then how can we like specialize and teach people what they need to know for their job? So
Yeah.
I definitely see where you're going with that, and I do agree. I just my point is that we need to make college more affordable. While everyone screams college should be free, I mean, what even in, like in the case of you and I, if we decide, trade school is what we end up doing for the rest of our life, we'll pay that out of taxes. The person in college getting that free college pays for it for the rest of their life in taxes. And
Yeah.
that drives your taxes up, which drives government spending up. And I am not an advocate for government spending. I feel like that's part of the reason why we're in so much debt. But
Well,
getting
while we're on the subject of government spending, I mean that could swing me into what my belief is. If you'd like to go there, or if you'd continue your idea, if you have continuation
no,
on it.
go ahead. Give me kind of your idea of how to deal with the kind of just an improvement specifically on more the financial side right now. We'll get more into fixing some of the schools and such a little bit later.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, for me on the financial side, like from consensus taking of like how much the government was spending into colleges as well. So obviously you have your tuition, and the students pay for most of the college, correct? And so that's the reason for tuition is to help pay the teachers' wages, your living expenses, et cetera, to pay the power bill. But the government alone has spent over 155 million in 2017 dollars in 2017 to those colleges, extra funding. Now, obviously, it probably wasn't spread out equally. It was probably, depending on how many people were there, like how many students, the
Right,
area, how good their
demographics
turnover.
and such
Yeah,
probably affected it.
yeah. But that's $155 million. Now, before they even intruded on that, like Harvard and everything like that, from my understanding, they weren't making any money from the government. The government was not funding them to be a college. They were funded by the students, and tuition was much lower. And I remember watching a documentary, and I wish I could, reinstate what it was, but it was a while back. It was probably sophomore year of high school, so I would say probably 2013, something like that. They did a documentary on those and the government spending. And it was like, okay, what are these colleges doing with that money? Well, the colleges were making so much that they were putting in hot tubs. And they were using that as leverage for kids, being like, "Hey, yeah, we're like the party state or the party uh, college over here. We got hot tubs for you guys to use, workout rooms, which workout rooms are great, but like we got hot tubs, we've got a dance club and stuff like that. Needless uh, accessories that they just needed to use that money. Otherwise, they'd lose that funding. So they're just using it so that way they can have it.
So
And I,
just to kind of clarify, what you're trying to suggest is that the government shouldn't fund it at all. We should cut government funding to colleges and bring it back towards being funded by students.
I think that is probably the best solution. Now, obviously, it's going to be hit, and I feel like colleges are probably going to try to boost up that money and deter the government from doing that. And I think the only way to go against that is to be like, well, we're just not going to go to your college. We just won't, and then you won't get any money. I feel like that trade schools might be the option for some people, and the others are kind of just going to be left there. And I think it's more of maybe we contact that professor that's in there and be like, hey, we want to work with you, but we don't want to work with the college. And and hopefully it'll only be like a year thing, or hopefully just a term thing, where basically students go on strike until they lower that wage, and the government can intervene and put a cap on it, like you said, and then the students will have to pay the certain amount, like per student, and they can't pay any more than that. And
And I think that's part of the reason why people need to discuss this problem more, especially at a kind of a a macro level, like in across the entire United States. People need to talk more about the idea of how to fix it,
oh
because
yeah,
I
oh yeah, big
because
time.
all we ever heard was yeah, colleges should be free.
Yeah, that's all I ever heard was it should be free, and I know in a perfect world that'd be great, but we don't live in a perfect world, so I know that money's got to come from somewhere, and I know it's going to come out of my bills, it's going to come out of my family's bills, it's going to come out of my retired grandparents' bills. There's no place where you're not going to get taxed for that. And as much as I wish I could say that, yeah, I know how to get all those tax write-offs and make everything free for myself and not have anything taken out of my taxes. I don't, and I'm not sure I'd want to go around all those hurdles to do that.
And the other thing is being an American, I shouldn't have to loophole my way out of taxes.
No,
Taxes should be money we send to the government so they can go and fix the things that are happening. And I feel like colleges take advantage of that, kind of like what you were saying. They were getting tuition from students, and then the government was like, "Hey, here's $100,000 to like help you out," and they're like, "Cool, why don't we just turn it into, like you said, party college? We call it that, and then we get more kids to show up, and they pay more tuition, and then we." And I think
yeah,
education and college especially has lost its kind of. I think we've lost the intellectual. It was a place of real learning, and now it's more like you go
it's a
there.
business.
Yeah, you go there, you pay some money, and they hand you a piece of paper, and you feel like you didn't really learn anything. Now that's not always the case, but I mean, I just sat through a sociology class, um, or I sat through it, and the professor said that genetic or biology doesn't have a thing to do with race. And I'm sitting there going, but I thought that's what we were. I thought we were taught that like race is because of pigment of skin and things like that, and
Yeah,
those are definitely caused by biological measure or
yeah, yeah.
biological. Um, and they
It's
take
bio.
and I'm sitting through this class, and the majority of the things I'm talking or that they're teaching go in one ear, out the other. I take the test, boom, I'm done.
Yeah, and you know what? And I feel like colleges make you take a lot of unnecessary classes too. Like I remember for my engineering class, I was having to take like art history, and I enjoyed art history. Don't get me wrong, and I understood some of it because like art history they didn't care which one you took, it was just take an art history class. I took one that kind of did relate to my engineering a little bit because it was about like buildings and like cathedrals and how they were built and stuff like that. So as an engineer, like you see how engineering techniques had evolved into this artistic art form of how to build buildings. But had I gone and just learned about paintings or pottery and the history behind that and how they evolved, it wouldn't have mattered to me. It would have had nothing to do with my degree. And even the one I took had nothing to do with my degree. I could have gotten my degree without that art history class. And
Right.
I feel like it's useless. It's a useless class that they give to you, and they're just like, well, here's a time waster to put, and that's how you get your degree, and that's how we get some extra money out of you.
And I agree that there are probably things that they throw in there to kind of pad out your credit hours so that way they get a little bit of extra money. But I also agree that you should take classes outside of what you're learning in order to kind of make you a more rounded person, right? Like I'm trying to become a history teacher, so I'm taking a ton of history classes, but I'm also taking classes in like math, science. Those are all required. I'm
Yeah,
also taking class in like art because knowing things about art when you look back in history, because history, while we always talk about in school is the wars, which is a real shame because like when you look at some of the culture that developed outside of
yeah.
those, it's incredible. Anyway, um,
Or even the culture that evolves from it. You know, we don't really talk about the culture that evolves from it very often. Like we talk about some of like the revolutionary art forms that came out of it, or like the depressions and stuff, but we don't talk about like the heightened parts of the war, or even during the war with things changing. It was just mostly about, okay, here were some battles, this is how many lives were lost, and you know, and then you kind of learn a little bit about the repercussions afterwards.
Right,
It,
and that
that was
takes
my
away
experience.
from the experience of history, because
Yeah,
history isn't just, oh, I want your stuff, I take it. No, it was about history is just knowing about human life, whether you're a creationist or an atheist or anything like that. When you look back at at the history of the world, and you go, man figured it all out the second we created fire,
yeah,
because our we were able to develop our stomachs were able to get smaller, and I think it was actually an intestine, not the stomach itself. But we were allowed to divert energy from that particular track because it was easier to digest cooked food to our brain, which helped develop us.
oh,
And
that's something I didn't know.
right, but that's something that they don't really talk about in school, and that's something they should. They should talk about things that helped us develop into better people.
Yeah,
As much as we talk about the great conquests of Alexander the Great and the fall of the Roman Republic, because the Visigoths sacked Rome. What caused the Visigoths to even be able to sack Rome? What were the cultural repercussions of that? Because we're still dealing with that today.
yeah,
And
oh,
I
big
think
time.
the education system spends too much time glazing over things that are important to help us understand. And that's where I kind of agree with you too on the idea that we need to stop taking worthless classes. We need to take classes that we can we connect with more.
Yeah,
We
yeah, and I think it should be more of an option thing. Like, don't get me wrong, like on that degree, like it could have just told me, hey, take like three elective classes, you know, and then I could have chosen which classes I wanted to take as an elective that I felt were like, hey, yo, I kind of interested in this, rather than sitting through a class I didn't enjoy, or like, you know, there could have been other ways to make allow me to take alternate classes to better round myself, because I completely agree with you on that. It is a good way to do it, is to round yourself and, you know, be a better human being and understanding, you know, where things are coming from, you know, because you run into all different types of people.
right, and to get us back on track into how to improve the education system. While those
Yeah,
are all really good, that was a really good idea of trying to limit the amount of extra credit hours, the padding
yeah, yeah.
that doesn't matter, while also retaining some of the classes that help you round yourself out. Let's get into kind of the structure of school itself and how we
Okay.
might be able to shift from this old structure back when we were industrialists. Every kid, the only thing that matters is our age. We all learn the same thing, standardization. Let's get into that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because that is definitely a big issue, and I think that's why, like, you know, a lot of those classes go the way they are because of the standardized testing. But what I think for change wise, and it's a big idea, and it would cause tons of ripples and take way long to get it done right, and it would take councils and councils of people, accountants, lawyers, everything to get this stuff working and built correctly. But I think it's a total revamp of how schools should be done. I believe that from kindergarten to eighth grade should be like, you know, your normal standardized math, history, geography, reading. I believe that it should be continuous through eighth grade and kind of kept the same, similar, maybe revamped a little bit to kind of crunch it a little bit, because I know, you know, when you spend a full grade just learning about times tables and division, I think that's a little obsessive, a little, you know,
I don't know what you mean. Like it's something that shouldn't take as long as it does.
yeah, I don't think a full year on it is really required to memorize it or learn it. And those people that haven't learned it by, you know, like let's say like half a year, they're not going to memorize it. There are people like in high school that I remember that did not memorize it. They could not. do multiplication by hand. They needed a calculator just because they just didn't use it.
Right,
And that
but the benefit of the society we live in, I feel, is that we should allow them to use calculators. I mean, like
oh yeah, oh
that's
yeah, oh I completely agree. They have it in their pocket 24/7. There's almost no time you're not going to have one, you know. So
right.
you run into a problem, you can Google it. You can just Google it, you know.
And that's the thing is like, well, you shouldn't just be looking up answers all the time because that doesn't further your education. Utilizing the tools to help you learn it is definitely something I feel like teachers tend to look down on.
Yeah, and I hate that because like in math, there's rules. You know, there's rules for things. Like you know, the area of a square obviously is length times width. You know, and that's not hard to memorize. But some of those other uh, shapes, they have different kind of formulas that go with them for area, circumference, diameters. You know, and stuff like that. And it's like why not allow us to just look it up? Because at that point, I'm memorizing hundreds of different things.
Right,
Why
and
not just
that's
allow
the
me to
thing.
look it up? Yeah, and
But
like even like I've noticed like on tests in science, like yeah, it's really basic. We're just gonna give you the paper for those formulas because those aren't the formulas we're teaching you. We're teaching you this other stuff, but the formulas come into a factor, and we don't expect you to memorize the formulas. So here you go. And it's like okay, well that's great. To be honest, like it makes it so much easier.
absolutely, it absolutely makes it easier. Back towards kind of the back to kind of what you were saying though, 1 through 8th grade, you were saying, or K through 8, you were saying is more back towards um, the typical
Standardized. Yeah.
standardized kind of learning. You learn basic math, basic reading, things like that. What's the next step?
I think the next step is from freshman year in high school. I think freshman year through senior year should be spent more towards learning a career. Obviously trade schools are the more simpler version of this, but I think it's kind of more of like like structuring it more of like a college in the sense of like here is your first year. You're still going to learn your writing and math because I believe both of those are very important because you're constantly going to be writing for the rest of your life. And math is just something that if you don't use it, you forget it, for the most part, simple stuff you won't forget. You won't forget how to add or minus things, and you probably won't forget how to multiply or divide things. But like formulas, such as like I said, the square, like times width, some people will forget that. And I feel like it's a good thing to add on. It may not be a necessity, but I feel like it's a good thing to add on. But aside from that, I think going into like structuring like college with careers in mind. Uh, so like going in and it's like, okay, well, here's your careers. Uh, we're gonna have you try three different ones. We're gonna have you sit in on the classes. We're gonna have you go on field trips for these jobs that you feel interested in. Like you get to choose which ones you think you kind of want to like. And obviously, there's gonna be problems with that in the sense of manpower because you're gonna have to have lots of options at schools, and not all schools will have every option. And and at first, at least, hopefully, you'll be able to get there.
Right,
And go ahead.
and kind of a way to help minimize that idea, because I like the idea. I definitely see some problems with it, just kind of offhand, but we'll get to that in a bit. But one of the things that I think can help minimize that problem is what if like for instance, we live in a small town
Yeah.
that does not have a ton of career options, but
Yeah.
40 miles away, there's a much bigger city that
Yeah.
has tons of career options. I think we can kind of schools should be more interweaved in order to help maximize
Well,
the effectiveness of it.
that's what that's what I was saying is it could be like field trips. I didn't even bring that up to that point, but field trips are going to be a major thing. Going to work sites is a major thing. Not all your work sites are going to be in that area. Hopefully, they'll be close enough that hopefully you can just take a bus ride. And I think that if like going to another school is an option, then that's how it should be. Might be a thing where you only go for like 3 days or something, and then you come back. And they might have like a building just for people that are staying there for the few days to come and sit in the classes and see, learn, and other options like that. And like I said, it requires teams. And I know one of the big things people are going to be like, how do you fund this? How do you pay for all this? Because this is obviously going to be an expensive
Yeah, I
process.
mean that wasn't one of my big questions is how does one
Yeah.
fund, especially
And
because you're asking people to be pulled away from their jobs to help teach the next generation.
well, I think though they're still going to get paid for their job. It's just that now instead of doing their job in full, they're going to be more of I'm going to teach you how to do my job, which they have to be willing to do it. You'd have to find people that have done it for like 5 years. They know how to do the job and are willing to teach it. And some are going to be easier to teach than others. And those, luckily, like those that have done it will know what is used in the field and be able to be like, hey, kid, these are the classes you got to go take. The school be able to provide hopefully most of these classes, if not all of them. You might have to go to another school, and they might be able to be like, here's the other school, here's the boarding if you need that, and hopefully not cost them any extra, and go and take these classes that are required for that career. And even if it's not like a career that can be done in the time of high school, it can set them up for colleges.
Okay,
It
so
can set them ahead so that way when they do go to college and they do have to pay that tuition of like $29,000, hopefully that, and it's on the low side, hopefully, not hopefully, hopefully that's the high side and it's less than 29,000 a year or a term. But it's one of those things that it'll set them hopefully years ahead so they don't have to spend as much.
and kind of since you've brought up the college, kind of how do you propose we lay out the college plan? Because while your idea sounds good, some of the public outcry isn't necessarily that that the school systems itself are problems. It's that we don't get the right kind of classes like personal finance and things like that. So
And
how
that
kind of a two-part question: how do we integrate college into your plan, and how do we address some of the problems that we heard when we were growing up, like no personal finance classes. They don't teach us
no,
things
no
like
real personal finance classes, I think that was.
right.
But
And our
yeah,
careers class was a joke.
and that's what I think that freshman year is going to be all about. It's going to be about your personal finance, and it's going to be your career class, where that career class is exploring these jobs. You got the full year. You're going to be taking turns where you go in there and you go check out these classes. You can check out jobs, and you can choose. And I think it's going to be like wait till probably your junior year. You might spend your first 2 years just searching what you want, and junior and senior year is when you actually take those classes for those careers and find out if you really like them or not, and have the option to opt out. And I think the best way to do it is with that person that actually does the job. He'll be able to provide what classes are going to actually be required in the field. Like, yeah, there's no reason to go take calculus for this electrical or this electrician job because you're not going to do anything more than algebra. And if you run into something you don't know, you can just Google it, or
So,
you
so
can just ask another.
you're suggesting that the job, the people in the job,
Yeah,
set up the curriculum to get into
I
that job.
I think they should set up the curriculum. Obviously, there's other teachers that are going to teach that curriculum, but I think they should be able to set up the curriculum in those schools and be like, hey, these are the kind of math class you want. And obviously, this is something that has to be worked throughout all the schools together and be like, hey, these are the classes that are required for an electrician. Because you can't have someone going in there and learning algebra one stuff and then somewhere in another school they're learning calculus because their professor said that's what they need to take for the same job. And I
Okay.
think there's some intercommunication that needs to go on in there, and discussed and voted on. Whatever is fully decided. Obviously, this is an idea in the rough. It's not like finalized because I haven't even brought up the financial way of dealing with it. Was pulling all government funding from colleges, and instead putting it towards the schools. You can take that
And
155 million and start putting it towards schools.
and while I like that idea, and I think that that could help address some of the problems that teachers face today with not being able to keep up to date textbooks and things.
Yeah.
Um, one of the big outcries I can hear kind of towards this is that you're putting teachers kind of out of work in a sense. Like
Well,
they
there's
won't be
still
as
teachers
needed.
that there are teachers that are going to be needed to train those curriculums. There's no way around it. These these people that have been doing these careers are just there to teach their part of the job, but they still are like, hey, you still got to take these math classes. You've got to take these certain writing classes. You're going to have to take these speaking classes. Yeah, there are some teachers that will be out of a job. Don't get me wrong. I mean, and when I say there are some teachers, it's kind of more of the you may not have the social justice, teachers. You may not have government teachers as a majority. And there's obviously still people that are going to be interested in politics and stuff, and they'll still need those teachers. But it might be more if you become a professor. You might have to be a professor at a college for those ones, rather than being a teacher on a high school level.
Then since you brought up liberal arts degrees, and kind of my take on them is not of a positive view, not because they're necessarily bad things that people don't, that shouldn't be
Yeah,
talked about. It's that you waste money on a degree and then complain that it doesn't make you money. That's more
yeah.
my but um should people be given the option to become a like for instance racial um a racial theorist. And in case you don't know what that is, or our listeners don't know what that is, it's essentially where somebody their entire theory is that racism is always inevitable and that it will always happen, and their job is to just identify where. Um,
Oh, that's fucking crazy. I didn't know that.
so like should degrees like that even necessarily exist?
Well, it's
Like
like
racism is obviously an issue stretching back since the beginning of human time, really.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I,
but I
I
feel like it's definitely more addressed now than it has been.
Oh yeah, big time. And I feel like it's been cut more than it ever has been. Obviously, a lot's been more brought to light, but I feel like it's lessened, in that sense. I feel like, it's a lot of people have become more accepting. Obviously, all it takes is a few outliers. All it takes is those radicals, and then everyone wants to blame everyone.
Right, and
Uh,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sidetrack us onto
Oh no, no,
race,
no,
but
no.
I'm saying,
It's fine, but I know what you're getting at. It kind of, to me, it almost seems pointless. It's like, what realistic purpose does that have towards human beings? Like, what does that do for us as like a community, as a country? Being like, oh yeah, well, racism's gonna pop up over here, or yeah, that was
but
racist. It's like,
and
for
it's not
most of
just
us,
the
we could tell.
it's not just the race that I'm getting. It's liberal
No,
arts degrees in general, like um, Native American studies. How does that, unless you're a historian and you're tracking down and kind of trying to figure out how native cultures lived, and that benefiting us in more knowledge of Native Americans, how does that, but using it as a degree just to say that you can talk about it, how do we address that's a problem in our schools?
and honestly, it's an idea that I haven't really tackled before, so I got limited knowledge on it, and I honestly didn't even know anybody that was taking those courses in my college. But that's because obviously I wasn't taking very many similar ones with them. Uh,
So
I
in that
don't know how.
case,
Go ahead.
since you don't really have an answer, and I don't have a sourced answer right now. I'm still kind of doing some research into it.
Yeah.
We'll have to circle back and dot that I eventually.
Oh yeah,
Um,
oh yeah. I'm sure we'll have comments on there that we can also interact with later about that, and they'll have their own theories on it as well and their ideas. And I'm sure someone will probably have that degree by the time that we get there, and they'll definitely have their perspective on it.
right, and that'll definitely help us shape our opinion. But
Oh yeah.
then I think the final point we'll get to this episode is the um, the pushing of agendas in school.
Oh, but yeah.
this one's kind of a big one. We've been seeing it mostly on the left, but it happens on the right too, um, where they push their ideology, their form of politics, onto students in order to kind of incite this feeling that that's what we need to be. And
Yeah.
what's your my take on it? I'll start this time.
Go
My
ahead.
my take on it is that school should be an intellectual safe haven outside of bias. And it's not just even the left or the right; it can also be religious bias. You could go to a biology course, and somebody who believes in the Bible and doesn't believe in science might tell you that everything that he's teaching you is a lie, and people will run with that.
Yeah.
And we kind of need to remove these biases out of the education system in order to kind of help maintain the what kind of what we're trying to teach.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree. The biases should be removed, but I also believe that it's almost impossible to remove that bias because everyone has their own thoughts. I think more than anything, they need to accept that if someone else has an alternating opinion and a differing opinion, that it's not them being attacked. It's just this person's idea, you know. So like, obviously, from what I've noticed, yeah, the left pushes a lot more in schools, from what I've noticed, and anytime you contradict that, whether it's in a paper, like because they may ask for the left view in the paper, or not specifically asking for that, but that's what they're looking for in the paper. They want to hear you agree with that side of view, and if you contradict it in your paper, you're punished for it. Your grade suffers for it, and instead of them reading it at a non-biased view, they are looking at it in a biased view, and I think that's where the big issue comes from, is that they don't allow that conflict of ideas. It is my idea and my idea alone,
and
and you will follow it unquestioningly.
and I've definitely ran into that in college as well. In my sociology class, somebody was bringing up how uh, conflict theory, which is Marxism, Karl
Yes.
Marx's a whole theory on the working class overthrowing the ruling class, and she brought it up as this positive view and that it only ever works, and it's only. And I went and in the comment I was like, hey, um, you do realize that um, Karl Marx, which eventually led into Lenin, which then eventually led into Stalin, caused mass starvation and genocide. Same thing happened in China. Same thing happened, and I brought up those historical facts, and I was immediately told by my teacher not to do that.
Yeah.
I'm not allowed
Because
to subjugate their theories to the to reality.
yeah, and I mean it's true. Like they don't care. They don't want you to bring up the facts because the facts will either prove them wrong or just hurt their feelings, and they care more about their feelings than they do the facts.
Right, and that's the thing. Why are we giving inches, and not even inches? We're giving miles for
Yeah.
this whole. We want everyone to feel better about themselves when they're wrong. If you're wrong, you're wrong. If you don't want to
Yeah.
change that you're wrong, that's on you. And I feel like in schools that's becoming more apparent. And I was just curious, what's your thought on how to correct that?
In all honesty, like I'm gonna bring up like our personal experience in like high school. We were lucky enough that I don't believe I ever saw it in high school. I believe that it was just like straight up. It was intellectual. There was no agenda behind it. Even in our government classes, there was never an agenda really behind it. Like I remember us debating in our debate class, debating like different sides of a what was it? I think it was freedom of speech in school, and there were because of like a student that was arrested for it and stuff, and they wanted to hear both sides, and you didn't get graded based on your sides, like your point of view on your sides. It was just like, okay, here's the facts, and that's what I'm grading you on, you know. And I believe that was good. And to solve it, to be honest, it's so ingrained at this point that the only way to remove it is to, one, make it punishable, make it more acceptable for students to report that, and to have said professors that are teaching that way to be persecuted for it, to have consequences.
And
Yeah,
that's kind of something I agree with. There needs to be consequences for removing that person's choice to to differentiate from them, to have a different opinion. And um like you said, we were lucky enough we didn't have that in high school. But the thing that I do see more is it's in colleges. It's rooted in
yeah,
colleges.
yes, it really is, and it's like that's when most people are most impressionable. You're out in this new world, you finally get freedom, and you don't you're no longer listening to someone. It's all you, and you go to these colleges and they're like, oh well, now it's time to take advantage of that because there's no one here to tell you you're wrong either, you know.
Yeah,
And
and
I
that's
think it's just it's blatant abuse of power in that sense, like to allow that, even with reports, it's like they don't seem to follow those consequences, and it's almost like colleges prefer you to teach that way. It seems like it's almost encouraged to be taught that way. Otherwise, you wouldn't see it so rampant.
and
At
that's
least,
the crazy part, is that
yeah,
it becomes so rampant that people we grew up with, that had very, not even like left or right leaning views. They were very centralized. They were
yeah.
they thought about what they said before they said it, are now out there rioting in Portland. You know,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and but to go from like having a very level head and can have a discussion with someone and a debate with someone, to writing in Portland, and anytime anyone tells you that you're doing wrong, they go, "No, I'm not wrong."
Oh
Instead of
yeah.
reaching that. And I think education has to do with that, and that's something that we need to fix.
Well, I mean, like, okay, this year was an exception. In the city of Bend, they voted blue. This is the first time in a very long time that I've ever heard of them voting blue. When I went to school, or when I was going to college, uh, they voted red that year. They voted red, big time, because Bend has been maintaining, like they have maintained being Republican, far right for the most part, and voted for Republican the entire time. This first year that they voted blue, but I remember like going from the streets on election year, going through the streets of Bend, it was all Trump, all Trump. Like, yeah, this is great, or he's good, he's gonna be good for the people. Vote red, stuff like that. As soon as I got on campus, it was Biden. It was all Biden and Hillary Clinton rallies on
Right.
campus.
and
Not
and
not
that's
a single Trump voter, not a single anything like that. They were run off. If you came in there and said anything about Trump, you were run off.
and that
And
that's the strangest thing to me too, because it's like, education should not be a political battlefield.
no, it shouldn't. It should just be like, here we are. We're trying to teach you, and then based off all this education that you've gotten, all these experiences you've learned and have gotten from this, place of learning, you take it in the real world and then listen to these parties debate and decide on your own of what one aligns with your morals and your beliefs better, and you think actually will fall through with what they say, and also is a plausible way of handling things, because there are some that just say some absurd stuff to get your vote. you know
Right, and
it,
that's
it
that's the thing, is we've allowed politics to infect everything in life,
yeah.
and education pays a high price for it. We
Oh
no
yeah.
longer support intellectualism the way we used to. It
Yeah, if
was
you're punished for having a different idea.
Yeah, and that's the craziest idea to me, because some of the smartest, brightest people, um, they could be Biden supporters, they could be Trump supporters, they could be Joe Jorgensen supporters. It doesn't The education they receive,
Kanye West.
or Kanye West, but the point is that the education they receive, and the things that they um so that they talk about, and the ideas that they bounce around, whether it's scientific or historical. Well, and that was the big one for me, is history is trying to be rewritten, and
Oh yeah,
but those used to never be something people would say no, that never happened like that.
yeah. To say history didn't happen, or to me, is just blatantly ignorant.
Or that history hasn't changed, or it is changing, in like the sense that, for instance, they say racism has been in America for 250 plus years, or no, longer. I'm sorry. I think it was longer than the country had been around, the United States specifically, because
Yeah,
there was slavery in the colonies. The problem is you can't rewrite the history of the United States starting from the colonies when they were still British.
yeah,
That's British history leading into American history.
yeah,
You can't say that was America, because it wasn't America yet. You
yeah.
can't just put the country's name there. You're denying the accountability that Britain now has to take hold of, while also implicating the U.S. in more history that they weren't even technically a part of yet.
Yeah, they didn't exist.
And that's, I feel like, because we allow politics and things like that to get into history, that's part, and education. That's why we're dealing with the problems we're dealing with today.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. It's just some ridiculous stuff that shouldn't even be a form of contest. You know, it shouldn't even be a debate at that point. It's literally, this is just how it is. You know, I would think it would be pretty straightforward, and there's no other way to interpret it. And it's sad to see that people will do that. I mean, it's one of those things. People will twist words however they see it to make it, fit their narrative, and it hurts to see. You know, it's hard to see like ourselves like cripple ourselves.
Right, we're
With that.
shooting ourselves in the foot and
Yes.
saying it's a victory.
Exactly, and it's hard to believe that that's a thing. And like debating nowadays, there is no debating. Like parties do not debate. They do not see like, oh, his idea versus my idea. Instead, it's enemy. It's it's not even someone to debate with. It is an enemy that has to be taken down. They see
Right, and
him as,
that's the where we stop bouncing ideas around,
yeah,
and
and bettering them by
right,
bouncing them around and seeing the flaws. Instead, it's my way or the highway. My thought is perfectly right. It's like when I brought up the schools earlier. Obviously, I know this is a flawed idea. I want to bounce it around. I want people to,
yeah, I want to
basically
have the
iron out the
discussion
wrinkle.
of how do we iron out this problem.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. Like I could bring up a good example of that is Obamacare. Obamacare was an amazing idea, but it was rushed out and it was not perfected. It was not finished.
Right,
And that's what made it such a big problem.
he forced it on you even though it wasn't finished. It was, and the other
Yeah,
problem with that too, because Obamacare sounded nice on paper, but the Republicans hated it, so they fought it every inch of the way.
yeah. And it's like, why not, instead of fighting it, try to improve it? Find a solution that makes everyone happy. That's the whole basis of our government. It's you got to find that middle ground. Obviously, not everyone's going to end up the happiest person, but at least they'll both get what they want. In a sense. They'll both find something that they can agree on and use that rather than one side has to win.
Right, and that's, we will definitely start talking about some of those problems probably in the next episode, which will be the
Yeah.
flaws of a two-party system. That'll
Yes.
be
Yes.
released Wednesday, as long as we maintain our
Yeah. Yeah.
schedule. So,
If it doesn't take an hour to load.
and if it doesn't take an hour to get our stuff
Yeah.
to work,
Yeah.
but I definitely think, while we didn't necessarily come up with solutions, we did open up the discussion on how to fix schools in college, and that
And
was kind of the intent.
I think we've come up with like, and I mean, I think that the solution of pulling funding and giving it and trying to basically reconstruct your like schools altogether from K to college or K to 12 uh, is a big step anyway. And there's a lot that can be done with it. There's a lot that could be changed, regardless. Even if you didn't go the route I went, I feel like the possibilities are endless of like what worked. Do we need to go back to small schools of like 16 students get taught everything by one person and just multiple of those? It's one of those ideas that there again, it's not one-sided. It's such a gray area, and there's so much that could be worked out on, and you could have multiple groups.
Right, and hopefully we will. Hopefully, if not, even if our podcast doesn't do anything for that, hopefully, if anyone is listening, they share it with their friends share it with their friends, and we open the dialogue that needs to happen.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll make it up there. I mean, obviously, I don't know what politicians think, and but I am hoping maybe like a politician may hear this at some point and be
And they
like,
might bring
hey,
it up.
maybe we should bring it up. Maybe we should think about our schools and revamping it. And I mean, as we go through the years, the students that grew up in that standardized testing and realized the flaws and, realized how much they hated it and were like, all I did was memorize and then forget it after the test because I didn't need it, are going to take positions of power like that and be able to make those changes.
Right, and I hope that young people our age and younger and a little bit older, but they're still considered young,
Yeah, yeah.
hear this, and when our time comes to kind of run the country and fix the country, we will take the steps necessary to not just continue this cycle of bullshit.
Yeah, well, we'll make changes for the better, and we won't leave the country ruined for the next generation. Kind of like what happened with us. We've been left a country in shambles of what it used to be, of its former self.
Right, we're living in the we're in a soulless America, and
Yeah,
we're going to try and fix it.
and that's what I really hope does happen. I really hope it does get fixed because it's something that's going to need to be fixed. We can't keep going like this. We're at each other's throats. If something does, if it doesn't change, something's gonna give, and whether it's gonna be like a war of Democrats versus Republicans, or races versus races, if it's gonna be uh, lower class versus high class, middle class being wherever the hell they're at,
Right,
you know, or like city versus country, we don't know what it'll be, but the hope is that
it
won't
won't
give.
reach that point.
Yeah, it will, hopefully the change will come and be able to repair those boundaries and those feelings of contempt and stuff like that and make America better, make it
And
great. Not just be said, make it a great again, but to actually make
actually
it
make
great
it
again.
great to actually
Yeah,
affect change. And
yeah.
I think that's a good place to wrap up this discussion. Like
Sounds
always, I'm
good.
your host Robbie,
I'm your co-host Zach.
and this was the Gentleman's Jury. Thank you guys for listening.
Have a good one.